Hi there, welcome back to this week's edition of Get Me Right, your deep dive show on governance and international news events that impact our lives, yours and mine. If not immediately, then for sure in the long term. That's why the choice of the weekend, when you can sit back and soak in. This past week had two major developments, one domestic, one global. The Modi government presented its first budget of the third term. There was nothing big bang, and the markets even tanked. Typically, we have seen governments using the budget as an occasion to make populist announcements that buttress their constituencies. Not the Modi government. It takes political courage to think long term when you have taken a beating in an election and are looking at another difficult round of elections in 4 months. I'll explain the why and how of it. Second, in a coup of sorts, President Joe Biden has been replaced by Vice President Kamala Harris to hold Democrat Party ticket for elections in November for the United States President. Endorsements were quick even as an incommunicado Biden recovered from COVID. Conspiracy theories abound. But the contest is clear now. The same week, Donald Trump got the official nomination of the Republicans to be President of the United States this election. We discussed conspiracy theories around his assassination bid last edition. But this week, let's understand who between the two, Trump and Kamala, is a better deal for India, and for what reasons.
Mr. Speaker, sir, with this, I commend the budget to this august House. Jai Hind.
Union Minister for Finance Nirmala Sitharaman presented her sixth full budget this week. One thought it was a document of political courage. But before I tell you how, let's look at some of the political reactions and criticisms that came in. It's a grudge list.
I'm particularly happy that she had an opportunity to read the Congress manifesto. Yes. She picks the good ideas on page 11, page 30, and page 31.
Rahul Gandhi thought it was a Kursi Bachao budget because Andhra and Bihar were mentioned more times than Bengal and Telangana, indicating towards the former being ruled by BJP allies JDU and TDP respectively. P. Chidambaram grudges the fact that the apprenticeship scheme announced to tackle the issue of employment is copied from the Congress manifesto. An op-ed in the Indian Express written by JNU faculty Himanshu headlined it as a budget that prioritized politics over economics. From flagging a demand and consumption deficit to precarious exports to tepid private investment, the tone of the article was more corporate than what all the corporate honchos who spoke on the budget after Sitharaman's speech could muster. Shekhar Gupta of The Print termed it as BJP's socialist turn. He has not done it for the first time, of course. But these are same set of people who till a day before the budget were panning the Modi government for helming jobless growth. When the issue gets addressed, the goalpost is moved and the provision is termed socialist. Let's get you the political courage aspects clear.
Bihar has frequently suffered from floods, many of them originating outside the country.
While there was a preponderance of projects mentioned for Bihar and Andhra, thus giving an impression that the Modi government caved in to the JDU-TDP pressure, the facts are to the contrary. One is the issue of perception. Remember those days when ABA Ghani Khan Chaudhary of Bengal would be the railways minister in the 1980s, or Lalu Prasad Yadav in UPA years. Listening to the railways budget, one would get an impression that all trains originated in Malda town, the constituency of Chaudhary, or some railway station in Bihar in the case of Lalu. The reality was that the ministers were only allowed to be partial to their home states in their speeches, even as the entire document remained neutral on project allocation. So in the case of Modi government's first NDA budget, ally states might have got reflected in their speech, even as the larger budget remained states neutral. The Gaya Industrial Corridor that has been announced, for example, is part of the larger Amritsar-Dibrugarh Industrial Corridor that would have anyway passed through the middle of Bihar. Also, The development projects announced are in the nature of center-state collaboration, not giving total leverage to the ally. It takes a measure of political courage to innovate in a manner that the allies get what they want, yet the philosophy of not opening multiple windows of corruption remains. Markets reacted sharply in the negative. And that brings me to the more substantive arguments in favor of the Modi 3.0 first budget being a document of political courage. Much of the market's nosedive had to do with the increase in taxes that directly affect stock trading, both the short-term and long-term capital gains taxes, as also the securities transaction tax, the levy imposed for every trade you make in the markets. Obviously, this makes participation costlier and hence a deterrent to that extent, explaining the reaction. On the face of it, this seems like a counterproductive measure. Why rock the boat if things are going fine? The Sensex has been booming. At over $5 trillion, India's market capitalization of listed companies is higher than the national GDP at about 140%. The last of the $1 trillion gain has happened in just last 8 months, since November 2023, which means those 250 million odd market participants have added $1 trillion or about rupees 80 lakh crores to their wealth in 8 months alone. But there's a flip side to it. At $5 trillion, India's share in global market capitalization stands at 4% against the historical average of 2.7%, giving you an idea of the stretched valuations. Nifty 50 trading at price to earnings, or the PE multiple of 19, is about 20% higher than its long-term average. This is an indication that a lot of money supply is chasing limited good quality stocks, thus making them expensive. In fact, this made India one of the most expensive markets in the world. A day before the budget, Reserve Bank of India Governor Shaktikanta Das had warned that the market froth is not good. It was even creating some structural problems of liquidity in the banking system. Das said that the deposits growth, or money deposited by people in their savings accounts, had slowed as those were getting diverted to equities and real estate. While affordable housing remains a focus area, much of the heavy lifting there also is being done by the government through projects like the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, PMAY, and Swami, the special window for affordable and middle income housing. A measure of the housing mess can be gauged from the fact that of the total of companies entering the insolvency resolution process through the IBC mechanism, 21% are from real estate sector. Of the cases that got resolved, 1 in 4, or 25%, belong to the real estate. Also, of the 891 corporate lenders approaching IBC, 133, or roughly 1/5, happen to be real estate lenders with their money stuck in projects with builders. Add to it the fact of over 4 lakh housing units stuck in delayed projects, as acknowledged by the economic survey. You are looking at a scenario where lakhs of crores of rupees of hard-earned wealth of people is stuck in dead, non-productive asset class. Of late, with the post-COVID recovery, an element of speculation has also been injected. Ask me, I live in Noida, and both in terms of projects delayed and uncontrolled bull run in prices, it's a nightmare in the making. This was creating problems for the banks, for their credit requirements, which is their chief revenue source. Banks were getting into a zone where they had to borrow money at higher rates vis-a-vis the cost of deposits. A measure of stock market froth is the number of new accounts opened in last 1 year alone. In the last 1 year, markets saw over 4 crores of new demat accounts opening, taking the total to 16 crore plus. There's an adage for those who are active in stock trading. If your barber or the car driver starts talking about scripts to buy or sell, it's time to quit. The markets are almost reaching that stage. Somebody had to bite the bullet. Nirmala Sitharaman has done that job. Taken together, the capital gains tweaks and the indexation benefit removal would have the much-needed sobering effect on the speculative side of both the equities and the real estate markets. Who benefits from preventing the mayhem that was building up? Obviously, the middle classes. But that long-term nuance is missed by those who thought tax saving is only about tax slab changes. Now let me show you some other aspects of the budget that indicate towards political courage in the face of temptations. For the first time in the last 4 years, we have a current account surplus for any quarter, which means we exported more than our imports. Robust exports are also reflected in great foreign reserves at over US $650 billion. Fiscal deficit is on the glide path as mandated by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Inflation, though of some concern on food and fuel basket, remains in manageable territory. All these taken together give the Modi government enough space to splurge. If it so wished, it could have done that by way of populist measures like tax breaks, waivers, deductions, and rebates. The Congress-led UPA effectively bought the 2009 mandate with the farm loan waiver largesse in Manrega payouts in a much dire fiscal situation. Just to give an example, in 2012, the food fuel fertilizer subsidies bill stood at about rupees 2 lakh crores, at a steep 14% of the total budget. It was the year of highest subsidies in the UPA decade. Agencies were warning about this open-ended subsidy bill. There's a direct correlation between that fiscal irresponsibility and the inflation hitting double digits territory of 10%. Coupled with corruption as a governance issue, it paved the way for the phase-out of the UPA government by 2014. In 2024, Sitharaman has succeeded in capping the subsidy bill at 8% of the total, even as the absolute figure of subsidizing welfare has almost doubled to rupees 3.8 lakh crores. The rupees 2 lakh crores allocated for giving a jobs push to the economy are, despite the fiscal deficit target getting downward revised to 4.9 against the 5.1% that was estimated in the interim budget just 4 months ago. Nobody would have accused the Modi government of irresponsibility had it stuck to that February figure. Imagine, after the reduced numbers in the Lok Sabha, any government would have developed political cold feet in Kursi Bachao mode. But Modi did not. The government is maintaining a fine balance between fiscal discipline and welfare measures, and despite reduced numbers in the Lok Sabha, with political courage. On to the second story. This week saw clarity emerge on who are the presidential candidates on both sides of the political divide in the United States. Donald Trump got Republican nomination at party's national convention in Milwaukee, and President Joe Biden got dumped in favor of Kamala Harris for her to be the Democrat challenger to what seems like a Trump juggernaut post the July 13 assassination bid on him. What's in it for us in India? How would we get impacted if Trump is president? What would be the foreign policy consequences if Harris gets the mandate in November instead? Would Trump be a tariff hawk on India given his earlier position? Remember him calling us the tariff king. Or things have changed since 2020. Let's take a deep dive. Those watching foreign policy closely would recall that famous Trump soundbite. If you've forgotten, listen in.
India, which is the tariff king, they called us and they say, we want to start negotiations immediately.
Clearly, Trump did not forget. Trump ran his 2016 campaign posing as an outsider out to wreck the corrupt DC establishment. He turned that old Beltway metaphor, drain the swamp, into a campaign war cry. The phrase has been used by American politicians from Helen Jackson in 1880s to Ronald Reagan in 1980s, a century later, and became Trump's talisman, with the former president using it as many as 150 times in his social media posts in the 2016-2020 period. In some ways, he was an outsider even for the Republican establishment, and that outsider's worldview affected both domestic and foreign policy. Steps like meeting Kim Jong-un of North Korea, going soft on Putin, shifting US embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and of course, the biggest one, threatening to disband NATO if Europe did not pay up, were all maverick policy shifts that had the mark of his outsiderness. Trump carried the same unconventional approach to his position on China. It was for the first time, perhaps, that the threat from China was acknowledged publicly at that level of DC establishment. Trump not only went public, but translated that into policy consequences, changing 2 decades-old American stance of facilitating and accommodating China's economic rise to one of countering and containing the dragon.
Over the last 2 decades. But those days are over. We will no longer tolerate such abuse. We will not allow our workers to be victimized.
Trump's India relations must be seen in the context of that China shift. He revived the defunct Quad grouping in 2018. In geostrategic sense, this was a substantial upgrade on optics for India's positioning in the Committee of Nations. It was under Trump that the Pacific Command of the US Defense Forces was renamed as Indo-Pacific Command, emphasizing the pivot to India. Resuscitating Quad and making Indo-Pacific a catchphrase gave such FOMO to European powers that from the United Kingdom to Germany, from France to Italy, everyone came out with their own Indo-Pacific strategy papers. With India as a pivot for this strategic space, New Delhi saw a visible upgrade in travel itineraries, becoming a more frequent pit stop for global diplomacy. Trump's NATO skepticism and judgment-neutral views on Putin also mean that India would get a larger breathing space to nurture its Russia partnership without bothering about an ideological hectoring, which has sort of peaked after PM Modi's Moscow visit last month. We have seen Biden administration making it a prestige issue, with innumerable briefings where unhappiness has been conveyed. There was a minor tiff with the US Ambassador Eric Garcetti in New Delhi when he responded to MEA's espousal of a strategic autonomy on Modi-Putin hug by suggesting that there's no strategic autonomy in a war. Clearly, believing that Europe's war is everybody's war and that India is already considered a party was Garcetti's ideological position. Sometimes those pinpricks have turned farcical. Like on Thursday, when a Pakistani reporter sought US State Department views on the Yogi government's Kanwar Yatra diktat in Uttar Pradesh, and the visibly clueless spokesperson obliged with an answer, albeit with restraints.
We have seen those reports. We have also seen the reports that the Indian Supreme Court on July 22nd issued an interim stay on the implementation of those rules, so they're not actually in effect now, with our Indian counterparts on the importance of equal treatment for members of all religious communities.
These kinds of hectoring, lecturing, pontificating, holier-than-thou approaches to conducting diplomacy with India would obviously taper off under Trump.
They'll charge you like 250% tariff. We don't want it. Then you get an invite. Build your plant over here. So these companies, they go over there. Harley-Davidson did it in India. They couldn't sell. They had a 200% tariff on motorbikes. I had them in the office in the White House.
But as that Michigan speech showed, Trump has not forgotten India's tariff walls. If elected, he might come hard on them in his second term. But it would not be different from earlier, when he came double hard on China and rest of the world. So on trade, it would be a closely watched space. Even here, a lot has changed since Trump passed on the baton, however reluctantly, to Biden in 2021. We are in a post-COVID world with strong linkages, but stronger disruptions. 2 current wars in Europe and the Middle East, and half a dozen flashpoints from Armenia, Azerbaijan to China, India, and China, Philippines, and China, Taiwan, mean that scope for an all-out trade war is limited for America also. A reluctant trading partner, India, is much better than a thieving China, is the Trump worldview. Connected with trade is the issue of visas, the H-1B holy grail for India's IT industry. The disruptions on that front have become secular between Republicans and Democrats. What Trump might deny loudly was done by Biden surreptitiously, blaming the slow bureaucracy for the application pileup. If Trump comes down heavy on illegal migration from the southern borders of the United States, Why should it be a diplomacy concern for us? Kamala, on the other hand, never built the wall, never been to the wall. If anything, her visa denials might put her open to the charge of double standards, given the Liberal Democrats' position on open borders and accommodating illegals, as deep as New York and Chicago. With increasing economic power, China is also a military threat, which of course India is not. In a way, India's evolving relationship with the United States has a bipartisan consensus on both the Capitol Hill and the Raisina Hill. From Clinton to Biden, DC has seen India's rise as being in America's interest. Trump only continued the uptick in US-India relations, minus the preachiness of some Democrat presidencies. The only catch: while Trump might come hard on China on issues of trade and technology, his insularity might make the United States less inclined to intervene on Taiwan in case of a Chinese military maneuver. And that might make India dig in deeper trenches in Arunachal Pradesh and Ladakh. But we cross the bridge when it comes. Republicans and Democrats have divergent views on climate change, from Bush Jr. versus Al Gore in early 2000s to Trump versus John Kerry now. Not that Kerry, Biden's special emissary on climate change, has been very effective in the absence of climate finance. But a Kamala presidency would continue to push a global effort to respect carbon neutral deadlines at the very least. In case of a Trump return, expect climate change to petter off the missionary mode mechanisms of the US, not just for India, but for the rest of the world as well. Whatever we are doing on green energy transition would have to have an internal mojo, minus the American push. There's an innate commitment in Prime Minister Modi to drive policy and governance to tackle climate change. A Biden-Harris push is good in the sense that it helps connect that internalized commitment with financial support. We would do fine even without. If you believe the social media echo chamber, Kamala Harris is more left than liberal. Many of her videos from the past project a picture of her as representing a kind of wokeism which makes even liberal pro-Democrat party commentators like Bill Maher cringe. A Harris presidency might make those irritable American interventions on human rights, climate, social harmony, secularism, pluralism, minority rights, gay rights, LGBTQIA rights little more pronounced.
I am Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman sitting at the table wearing a blue suit.
But let me share an anecdote from Prime Minister Modi's first Biden-Harris meeting in the autumn of 2021 in Washington, D.C. I was covering from the ground. The general impression that the Indian entourage carried to the White House was that Biden would be easy. Kamala, with her hard left swing, would be more difficult. By the time the two meetings ended, the view changed completely. According to those accompanying the Prime Minister, it was Biden who went off tangent a couple of times, while the conversation with Kamala ended up being the one without creases. If politics makes strange bedfellows, diplomacy throws stranger surprises. So we can only second guess who between Trump and Kamala would be better for India. Ultimately, an American president has to be good to America. Being good to India can only be a corollary to that overarching thought. We have to carve out our own trajectory, taking into account both the possibilities. Democrat President Clinton was an NPT Ayatollah. He tried unsuccessfully to arm twist P.V. Narasimha Rao to sign on the dotted line so that we could never become a nuclear power. Post the Shakti tests by the Vajpayee government, once the bluff and bluster of sanctions had petered out, same Clinton started India's dehyphenation with Pakistan in American foreign policy. His Republican successor, George W. Bush Jr., made the civil nuclear deal possible. Imagine, the United States amended a domestic law of 1954 to make the 123 agreement possible to end India's nuclear apartheid. Obama years saw India firmly in American arc with major strides in trade and defense cooperation. It was Obama who called the India-US relationship one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century. Obama also became the first US president to openly endorse India's bid for permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Trump and Biden maintain the bipartisan consensus, and irrespective of who wins in November, the United States-India relationship remains evenly poised. Thanks for watching.